At the farthest edge of our galaxy, where even light begins to lose its way, there was a silence so deep that people believed nothing could exist there. For centuries, scientists had looked into that darkness and seen only emptiness. It was a border where space seemed to fold in on itself, a line between the known and the unknowable. Humanity had already explored thousands of stars, built colonies across distant worlds, and connected planets through powerful communication relays. Yet, no one dared to cross into what they called the Black Verge. It was thought to be just a void, no light, no sound, and no trace of life. Probes sent beyond that boundary never returned. Their signals would vanish, cut off as if swallowed by something unseen. Over time, the stories faded into background noise, replaced by newer missions, newer hopes. The Black Verge became a forgotten whisper in old astronomy journals. But one night, everything changed. In a quiet observatory orbiting one of Earth's outer colonies, a small group of researchers was reviewing data from deep space sensors. It was routine work, long hours, cold coffee, and endless graphs filled with static. But then, a faint pattern appeared in one of the transmissions. It was weak, almost hidden beneath the noise. At first, they thought it was an equipment error, some interference from cosmic dust or the malfunctioning of a relay station. Yet the signal returned again, and again. It wasn't random. It came in pulses, slow, steady, repeating every 22 hours. A rhythm. At first, no one wanted to believe it. Space is full of strange sounds, magnetic waves, dying stars, and cosmic echoes. But this was different. It was too precise, too deliberate. The team ran the data through every system they had. The signal wasn't coming from any known source or planet. It originated beyond the mapped edge of the galaxy, deep inside the area everyone thought was empty. When they reported it to the Stellar Frontier Institute on Earth, the first response was laughter. It sounded too much like the start of a sci-fi film, a signal from the void. But curiosity is something humanity never outgrows. After days of review, the data was confirmed as real. The frequency, pattern, and energy all pointed to something that couldn't be natural. Something, or someone, was sending a message from the darkness. News of the discovery spread quietly among top scientists and officials. Publicly, nothing was said. Privately, debates exploded. Was it a lost echo of a dying star? A natural resonance caused by gravity waves? Or was it artificial? A few believed it could be the work of an ancient civilization, one that vanished long before humanity even learned to light fire. Others dismissed it as a coincidence, a meaningless anomaly. But one man's voice stood out during those meetings, the director of the Stellar Frontier Institute. He said, "If the universe is trying to speak, we should at least have the courage to listen." And that was how the mission Lumen was born. It wasn't a large expedition. There was no army of ships, no dramatic announcement. Just one vessel, sleek, silver, and powered by a new kind of energy system that could sustain long-range travel for decades. It was called Lumen 1. The ship carried only 12 people, scientists, engineers, and explorers. Each one was chosen not for fame or politics, but for quiet determination. They were told they would be traveling farther than anyone had ever gone, to the very edge of human knowledge. As Lumen 1 left the orbit of the colony world, the people watching from the ground saw it shrink into a streak of light before disappearing entirely. No one knew when, or if, they would ever see it again. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The crew settled into a routine, recording observations, mapping energy readings, and analyzing the faint pulse that had led them here. They named it the heartbeat, because that's what it sounded like. A slow, deep thump that seemed alive in some strange way. The farther they went, the darker space became. Stars grew fewer and dimmer. The familiar glow of distant galaxies faded into black mist. The ship's scanners began to pick up small distortions, waves of energy that moved like invisible tides. It was both beautiful and terrifying. One evening, while the crew was gathered in the observation bay, the ship's sensors caught something unexpected. A light, faint but visible, flickered in the distance. It pulsed in rhythm with the heartbeat. At first they thought it might be a star, but stars don't blink like that. The light was too sharp, too deliberate. It was as if something was trying to catch their attention. They adjusted course. As they moved closer, strange things began to happen. The stars behind them flickered and twisted as though reality itself was bending. Instruments malfunctioned and readings jumped wildly. The ship's artificial gravity wavered. Yet, no one wanted to turn back. They had come too far to retreat now. After years of searching for meaning among the stars, they were finally standing on the edge of a revelation. The captain, a calm, steady figure who rarely spoke more than necessary, gave the order to engage the ship's newest experimental system, the Stellar Fusion Array. It was a powerful device designed to amplify energy signatures and analyze their origins. In simple words, it could split a beam of light into millions of fragments and read what was hidden inside. The moment they activated it, the pulse from the void surged. The entire ship trembled. Panels sparked. A wave of golden light burst across the viewing deck, spreading out into the blackness like ripples across still water. Then they saw it. Far beyond the darkness, a shape began to emerge. At first it looked like a reflection, maybe a trick of the sensors. But as the light stabilized, the crew stared in silence. It wasn't empty. There, hidden just beyond the edge of known space, was something vast, a network of glowing lines stretching across the void. It looked like a web of stars, but each point of light was perfectly placed, forming symmetrical patterns no natural process could create. It was as if someone, or something, had built a structure out of starlight itself. The realization hit everyone at once. Humanity had just discovered a man-made creation. Though man-made might not be the right word. Whatever built this was not human, at least not anymore. Excitement filled the ship, mixed with quiet fear. The crew began to record data, trying to understand what they were seeing. The light was moving, faint currents running between the glowing points, like veins carrying energy. It wasn't a static structure. It was alive in some strange mechanical way. One of the scientists whispered, "It's responding to us." And indeed, the lights flickered faster when the ship approached. The pulse, the heartbeat, grew stronger, echoing through the hull, until it was felt more than heard. For the first time in history, humanity had found a sign of intelligence older than its own, but none of them knew whether it was friendly or a warning. As the ship drifted closer, the crew noticed something else. Each glowing point wasn't just light, it was matter, compacted and spinning like a tiny sun. The formation stretched for millions of kilometers, all perfectly aligned. They realized this wasn't just a beacon, it was a boundary, a border protecting something far greater within. The ship's AI reported sudden spikes in radiation and magnetic distortion. Systems began to flicker. The captain ordered them to maintain distance, but the pulse seemed to pull them forward, as if gravity itself had changed direction. Everyone felt it, that silent, invisible hand tugging at their hearts, at their curiosity. They had reached a place that was never meant to be found. Back on Earth, the observatory team continued to receive the repeating signal, unaware that Lumen 1 had already crossed into something far beyond comprehension. The scientists on the ship stood at the windows, staring at the glowing lattice that stretched endlessly before them. The stars looked like eyes watching from a distance, ancient, patient, and waiting. One of the younger engineers whispered quietly, "Maybe the universe was never empty. Maybe it was just waiting for us to look closer." The captain didn't respond. He simply stared into the shifting lights and murmured almost to himself, "Then we'd better be ready for what's looking back." The last entry from that day's log described the same pulsing light that had started their journey, but now it was no longer a single heartbeat. It was many, a chorus echoing through the void as if the darkness itself had come alive. And then, for the first time in years, Lumen 1's signal vanished from Earth sensors. The black verge was silent again. But somewhere, in the deep quiet, beyond the stars, the lights continued to beat, slow, steady, and alive. Days turned into long weeks inside Lumen 1. The crew was still shaken by what they had seen, that glowing web of light hanging in the dark. Every person on board felt something deep inside them shift. It wasn't fear exactly, but something close to awe, mixed with the quiet realization that they had crossed a line no human had ever crossed before. The captain didn't speak much. His voice, when he did talk, stayed calm but firm. He kept reminding everyone that their mission was simple: collect information and return home. But deep down, everyone knew things were no longer simple. Whatever they had found wasn't a random signal or a dying star. It was something that had purpose, something built. Every hour, the signal pulsed again. The same 22-hour rhythm, the same faint hum that now seemed to echo through the ship's metal walls. The crew began calling it the pulse instead of the heartbeat. It sounded more mechanical now, more alive, like the voice of something that had been waiting in the dark for a very long time. The scientists tried to map the lattice of light they had seen earlier. It stretched farther than their sensors could measure, hundreds of light years wide, maybe more. Each point of light in that pattern gave off small bursts of energy that looked like miniature suns. But they weren't stars. They were controlled, stable, uniform, and connected by invisible threads of force. It looked like someone had built a network out of starlight. During one of their analysis sessions, the crew noticed something strange. The pulse they were receiving seemed to change slightly depending on their distance. When they moved closer to the lattice, the pulse quickened. When they moved away, it slowed. It was reacting to them, like a living thing sensing their presence. That discovery filled everyone with both excitement and quiet dread. It meant that whatever was out there wasn't just repeating a message. It was watching them. The captain decided to take the risk and move closer. They were explorers, after all. Humanity had always gone where no one else dared. If they turned back now, everything they had endured would be for nothing. So they prepared for the next phase, entering the lattice. Before the final approach, the crew gathered in the main observation room. The glass walls stretched from floor to ceiling, showing the endless black ahead of them. The lights from the lattice shimmered faintly in the distance like a glowing ocean. No one spoke for a while. They just stood there staring. Finally, one of the scientists whispered, "We might be looking at something older than humanity itself." The captain nodded. "Maybe older than our galaxy," he said quietly. Everyone strapped in as the engines powered up. The fusion drive hummed, glowing blue as the ship slowly began to move forward. The light from the lattice grew brighter and brighter until it filled every screen, every window, every corner of the ship. When they crossed the threshold, everything changed. There was no explosion, no noise, just a silent flash. The stars behind them vanished, replaced by an ocean of silver mist. The ship's readings went wild. Gravity twisted. Time itself felt slower. It was as if they had entered a different layer of reality, one hidden beneath normal space. The lattice surrounded them now, stretching in every direction. It wasn't made of solid matter, but of energy, pure light shaped into lines and patterns. The closer they looked, the more details they saw. The glowing points weren't random. They formed clusters, like cities floating in space. The crew was speechless. No one had ever seen anything like it. One of the engineers whispered, "It's not a structure. It's a system, a living system." The ship's AI began to detect faint signals coming from within the lattice. They weren't radio waves or anything known to human science. They were coded in light itself, sequences of pulses that repeated in perfect mathematical rhythm. It was communication. Something inside the lattice was talking. The crew tried to decode it, but the patterns were too complex. They didn't match any human or alien code. Yet one thing became clear. The signals were aware of Lumen 1's presence. The messages shifted every time the ship changed position, as if the system was studying them. Back on Earth, no one knew what was happening. The last transmission, they had received was a simple update, crossing into signal zone, entering Phase 2. After that, the line went silent. Inside the ship, tension grew. Sleep was hard to come by. The lights flickered at random, and sometimes the pulse vibrated through the walls so strongly that it made the floor tremble. The crew began hearing faint sounds, soft whispers, static, and distant hums that no one could explain. At first, they thought it was stress or exhaustion, but then the ship's AI confirmed something shocking. The whispers weren't random. They were faint audio imprints hidden inside the pulse. When the team slowed down the signal and replayed it through the speakers, everyone froze. It sounded like a voice, not clear words, not in any known language, but a voice nonetheless. It was rhythmic, melodic, and haunting, as if someone was trying to speak across the ages. The moment it played, every monitor on the ship flickered with the same image, a burst of light forming a shape that almost looked like a human face, blurred and shifting. Then everything went dark. For several minutes, the ship drifted in silence. Systems rebooted automatically. When power returned, the face was gone. The pulse had stopped. The endless rhythm that had guided them this far was suddenly silent. Everyone held their breath. The silence felt heavier than any sound they had ever heard. Then the captain spoke softly. "It's waiting for us to respond." That night, no one slept. The scientists argued over what to do next. Some wanted to send a reply, a simple transmission using the same light-based pattern. Others warned against it. They didn't know what they were dealing with. What if answering woke something dangerous? In the end, the captain made the decision. "If this is communication," he said, "then silence might be seen as fear. We came here to listen, not to hide." They began sending a reply. A single pulse, slow and steady, matching the same rhythm they had first detected from the edge of the galaxy. For hours there was nothing. The crew waited in tense silence. Then the lattice began to glow brighter. Lines of light started to shift, rearranging themselves. The pattern moved, forming a spiral shape that extended for miles. It wasn't just a response. It was a message, one drawn in light across the stars. The ship recorded everything. The energy readings were unlike anything in human history. It wasn't random. It followed mathematical precision with perfect geometry and balance. And then, the pulse returned, stronger, louder, closer. It wasn't just sound now. It was visible light. It flowed like waves across the ship's surface, forming shimmering patterns. For a few moments, it almost looked beautiful. But as they watched, one of the scientists gasped. The energy readings were spiking, far beyond safe levels. The lattice was not only responding, it was connecting to them, too. The fusion drives flickered as the power began to drain rapidly. The light from the lattice started merging with the ship's systems, flowing into every wire and panel like liquid electricity. Alarms blared. The AI reported an overload. The crew scrambled to shut down the connection, but the lattice kept pulling energy, as if it was trying to read them, scanning their ship, their technology, maybe even their thoughts. Finally, the captain gave the order to cut power completely. The ship went dark again. Every light, every system, every sensor turned off. In that darkness, everyone sat quietly. No one dared to speak. Outside, the glowing lattice still shimmered faintly, as if waiting. Minutes passed like hours. Then, slowly, the pulse began to fade. The energy readings dropped. The ship stabilized. They were safe. For now. No one celebrated. The silence was too heavy. The captain looked out through the glass window, staring into the shifting light. His voice was quiet when he finally said, "We didn't find it by accident. It wanted to be found." No one argued. Deep down, they all knew he was right. From that moment on, the mission changed. It was no longer just about discovery. It was about understanding what they had awakened, and whether it was still alive. The crew began recording personal logs describing everything they felt: fear, wonder, guilt. They all sensed that this journey was no longer about science. It was about connection. As the ship drifted deeper into the lattice, one thing became clear. The lights weren't just energy. They were memories, fragments of something that once existed, maybe a civilization, maybe an intelligence so vast that even death couldn't silence it. And now, through the silence of space, it was reaching out again. By the end of that cycle, Lumen 1 had traveled farther than any human vessel ever had. The last words recorded in the daily report said, "We have entered the heart of the lattice. It feels alive." Then the signal from Lumen 1 vanished again. And back on Earth, the pulse from the void started repeating one new rhythm, a slower beat, like a voice whispering from across time. When Lumen 1 drifted deeper into the glowing lattice, time began to feel strange. The stars outside no longer looked like the ones they had left behind. Some were brighter. Others seemed to move slowly, as if space itself was breathing. Every day felt longer than the one before, but no one could tell if it was real or if their minds were starting to play tricks. The pulse, that deep, slow rhythm, was now constant. It no longer came every 22 hours. It was steady, flowing through the ship like a heartbeat. The sound wasn't loud, but it was everywhere, in the walls, the floor, even in their own chests. Sometimes the crew could feel it more than they could hear it, as though the ship had become part of something living. The captain ordered everyone to focus on the mission, collect data, observe, and keep records. But despite his calm voice, even he seemed unsettled. They had all seen the same thing. The lattice was not just light or energy. It was built from something ancient and intelligent, and now it was responding to them, learning from them. One of the engineers noticed something remarkable. When the ship's lights flickered, the nearest strands of the lattice flickered too, perfectly in sync. It was as if the structure was copying their rhythm, trying to communicate in a way they could understand. The crew started small experiments. They sent simple light signals, short flashes, long flashes, repeating patterns. Each time the lattice replied, not in random bursts, but in sequences that matched their messages almost exactly. That was the moment they knew, without any doubt. There was awareness out there. Maybe not life as they understood it, but intelligence, memory, and purpose. The scientist leading the communication test said softly, "It's like talking to a mirror that thinks for itself." Over the next few days, the ship's AI began detecting new shapes forming inside the lattice. Large geometric figures, circles, triangles, spirals, all glowing softly in the distance. They were so perfectly symmetrical that no natural event could explain them. The crew recorded everything, but even the AI struggled to decode the meaning. One night, as the crew sat in the control deck, the spiral patterns shifted again. The pulse grew louder, vibrating the ship. Then a beam of light shot across the lattice, passing directly in front of them. It wasn't random. It moved slowly, carefully, as if guiding them somewhere. The captain didn't hesitate. "Follow it," he said. The beam stretched for miles, leading them toward a massive glowing object at the center of the lattice. At first it looked like a star, but as they came closer they realized it wasn't burning, it was rotating. The object was mechanical, a giant sphere made of overlapping rings, each one spinning in a different direction. Streams of light flowed between the rings like rivers of molten silver. No one spoke. The sight was too overwhelming. Humanity had built many wonders, but nothing like this. This was beyond technology. It was artistry written in physics. As the ship slowed, the AI reported something unusual. "Energy readings are identical to our fusion drives," it said. That made everyone freeze. How could that be possible? The lattice had been built long before humans even existed. Their own technology was brand new, barely a decade old. Yet the readings matched perfectly, down to the smallest decimal. That meant one of two things. Either humans had somehow rediscovered this technology without realizing it, or something out there had influenced them long ago. The scientist in charge of propulsion whispered, "We thought we invented fusion light engines, but maybe we just remembered them." It was a haunting thought, that humanity's progress wasn't entirely its own, but a rediscovery of something lost in the universe's memory. The closer they moved to the rotating sphere, the stronger the pulse became. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was vibration moving through their bones. The sphere seemed alive, as if each rotation of its rings was a breath. Then something incredible happened. The outer ring began to slow down. Streams of light curved toward the ship, surrounding it like strands of silk. The AI reported no threat, but the energy was so intense that the hull began to glow faintly. And then, the pulse stopped. For a few seconds there was total silence, the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. Then a soft sound came through the communication speakers. A voice. It wasn't in any known language, but it wasn't random either. It was patterned, melodic, almost musical. The pitch shifted slowly, forming waves of sound that felt like emotion rather than words. No one could understand what it said, but everyone felt the same thing: sadness. The voice wasn't threatening. It wasn't angry. It sounded tired, like an echo of something that had waited far too long to be heard. The captain ordered the message to be recorded, but the moment the AI began analyzing it, the systems flickered again. Strange symbols appeared on the screens: circles, lines, and small repeating figures. The AI translated the data into images, and when the crew saw them, their hearts sank. The images showed a star, bright, alive, beautiful. Then it split apart in a burst of light, scattering fragments into darkness. Another followed, then another, a whole chain of stars tearing themselves apart. The symbols kept repeating one phrase in different forms. The AI struggled to interpret it, but finally displayed a rough translation. Creation becomes destruction. The ship's data analyst whispered, "It's showing us what happened here." They realized what the lattice truly was: not a weapon or a machine for conquest, but a graveyard. The remains of a civilization that had tried to control stars themselves and failed. The lattice wasn't built to destroy. It was built to contain what was left after the destruction. The captain looked at the glowing sphere again. "This isn't a message," he said quietly. "It's a memory." No one spoke after that. They all just watched the slow rotation of the rings, thinking about what it meant. Humanity had dreamed for centuries of reaching the stars, of mastering energy, of building endlessly. But what if every civilization before them had tried the same thing? And this was how it ended. Hours later, when the crew tried to send a new signal back to Earth, the communication array flickered again. Instead of their own transmission, a different image filled the screens. It showed a planet, blue and white, glowing softly under a golden sun. It looked so familiar that several people gasped. It was Earth. But it wasn't the Earth they knew. The continents were slightly different, the oceans darker. It looked ancient, like a version of their world from millions of years ago. The AI confirmed the coordinates. It was indeed Earth's location, just not in the present. The crew stared at each other in silence. The lattice wasn't just showing them the past of another world. It was showing them their own. Maybe the beings who built the lattice had once been connected to humanity in ways no one could imagine. Maybe they had come from Earth long before recorded history, leaving behind fragments of their knowledge in the stars. The scientist closest to the captain said quietly, "Maybe this place isn't the edge of the galaxy. Maybe it's the edge of memory." That night the crew couldn't sleep. The glowing lights outside the ship moved slowly, shifting like thoughts. Some believed the lattice was still alive, not a civilization but the consciousness of one. Others thought it was just an echo, repeating its last moments forever. Still, no one could shake the feeling that they were being watched. Not in a threatening way, but as if something was studying them gently, like a teacher observing curious students. By the next morning, the voice returned. It was clearer this time, though still impossible to understand. But one word repeated several times in its strange musical tone, a sound that, when translated phonetically, resembled the human word for child. The captain understood what it meant. The lattice was calling humanity its child. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a threat. It was a memory trying to reach its descendants, reminding them of what once was, and what could happen again. Before the crew could respond, the energy readings spiked. The lattice began to glow brighter, and the ship's sensors showed waves of radiation spreading outward. Something massive was awakening deep within the structure. The captain gave the order to retreat, but the engines barely responded. The light surrounded them again, flooding every window. The pulse grew louder, vibrating through their skulls. For a brief moment, everyone saw the same image in their minds, a vision of billions of stars connected by light, then tearing apart in silence. And beneath that vision, a whisper in the same voice as before, We gave you our fire. Do not burn the stars. Then everything went black. When the systems came back online, the sphere had gone dark. The pulse was silent. The lattice around them had stopped moving, frozen in time like a memory finally put to rest. The captain looked out at the dark horizon. His voice was quiet but heavy. We came looking for answers, he said. We found a warning. No one disagreed. They had seen too much to think otherwise. And so Lumen 1 turned slowly, beginning its long journey back through the lattice, carrying with it the memory of a civilization that split stars asunder, and a message that might decide humanity's future. The journey back through the glowing lattice was quiet and too quiet. The ship moved slowly, surrounded by dim silver light that no longer pulsed or changed. It felt as if the entire place had fallen asleep again, retreating into silence after sharing its story. But that silence carried a weight that pressed on everyone. No one on board spoke much anymore. Each person was lost in their own thoughts, replaying the images they had seen, the stars tearing themselves apart, the voice calling humanity its child, and that final warning. We gave you our fire. Do not burn the stars. The crew had come so far searching for knowledge, but now knowledge felt dangerous. They had touched something ancient, something powerful enough to split the heavens. The captain spent long hours staring out at the window, watching the faint shimmer of the lattice drift by. His reflection in the glass looked older now, though only weeks had passed. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was the weight of understanding. The ship's logs were full of strange data, signals, codes, patterns that no one could fully explain. The AI tried to analyze them, but it could only describe them as memories stored in light. That phrase stayed with everyone. Memories in light. As the ship moved forward, they detected something unusual. A large, dark shape ahead, hidden among the faint glow of the lattice. It didn't shine like the others. It absorbed light instead. The AI at first thought it was a shadow, but as they came closer, they saw it was a massive structure, silent and broken. It looked like a city floating in space. Gigantic towers stretched upward, their tops shattered. Bridges hung between them like spiderwebs of glass. Everything was covered in a soft silver mist. It was beautiful and tragic at the same time, the remains of something once full of life and energy. The captain ordered the ship to slow down. No one had to ask what it was. They all knew deep inside that they had found what was left of the ones who built the lattice. The makers. The ship drifted closer, lights shining softly over the ruins. Fragments of symbols were still carved into the broken surfaces, long flowing lines that seemed to tell stories. The AI scanned them and found faint energy traces still active, though weak. This place has been dead for thousands of years, said one of the scientists quietly. And yet, it's still alive. They decided to send a small exploration drone. The drone glided out of the ship, floating between the broken towers. Cameras sent back high-resolution images, empty chambers, silent corridors, walls covered with patterns of light frozen in place. It was like walking through a city made of frozen fire. Then the drone reached what looked like a central hall, a massive circular chamber filled with statues of tall, slender figures. They weren't human, but they weren't alien in the frightening sense either. They looked peaceful, wise, almost familiar, as if they shared something with humanity. At the center of the hall was a giant sphere, half buried in the floor. It glowed faintly like an ember refusing to die. The AI picked up signals coming from it, extremely old but still active. It's a data core, the captain said softly. Their memory. The drone tried to interface with it and the ship's screens flickered instantly. Streams of symbols appeared, rushing faster than anyone could read. The AI began decoding, translating, and displaying short phrases. The first line said, "We are the makers." The next said, "We learned to move the light of stars." Then, "And we paid the price." Everyone leaned forward as more lines appeared, forming a long story written in bursts of energy. The translation was rough, but the meaning was clear. The makers were once explorers, much like humans. They had discovered a way to draw energy directly from stars, pure light, pure power. It gave them everything they wanted, endless life, limitless energy, and the ability to travel across galaxies. For ages they lived in harmony, their worlds glowing with brilliance, but with time ambition replaced balance. They wanted to create light itself and to become like stars. They built massive reactors to contain stellar energy, but the process was unstable. One failure caused an entire system of suns to collapse. The chain reaction spread faster than they could control it. The very fire they had created to sustain life became their undoing. To stop the destruction, they built the lattice, a network to contain the collapsing stars and absorb the energy. It worked, but at a cost. The energy burned their worlds, erased their bodies, and left only consciousness, stored inside the lattice of light. They became part of it, memories trapped in the very system they built. The voice the crew had heard wasn't a ghost or god. It was what remained of their collective mind. The AI translated the final line on the screen. "We left the lattice so others may remember. You carry our spark. Learn from our fall." The message hit everyone deeply. It was no longer about curiosity or science. It was about survival. Humanity had already begun experimenting with similar fusion systems back on Earth. If they followed the same path without understanding, history could repeat itself. For a long time, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the ship. Finally, the captain said quietly, "We have to take this knowledge back. The world needs to know." But as they prepared to copy the data, the ship's sensors detected something alarming. The energy levels around the core began to rise sharply. The sphere at the center of the ruined city was waking up. The drone's camera showed light spreading across the floor, flowing up the statues, along the walls, and into the air. The entire city started glowing again, as if the past itself was breathing back to life. The AI warned of extreme radiation spikes. The captain ordered the drone to disconnect, but before it could retreat, a burst of light shot through the transmission link and into the ship's systems. Every screen on the bridge went white. The crew shielded their eyes. When the light faded, strange symbols filled the displays again. Not messages this time, but images of faces, places, memories. It was as if the makers were showing their last moments. Flashes of their worlds, shining cities under twin suns, children playing near rivers of light, machines that floated on air. Then everything burning, stars collapsing, skies tearing apart, people turning to light. And through it all, one voice repeated, "Remember us." The captain slammed the manual override and cut the connection. The light vanished, but the data core's signal was still active, sending waves of energy through space. Then they saw it, a shockwave moving across the lattice like ripples spreading from a single drop. The lattice was reacting again as if it recognized that its story had been read. "Power surge incoming," the AI warned. The crew braced for impact. The ship trembled, the lights flickered, and for a brief second every panel glowed with golden fire. Then it stopped. When they checked the readings, the energy wave had stabilized. The lattice was glowing again, but softer now. Calmer, almost peaceful. One of the scientists whispered, "It wasn't an attack. It was gratitude." The captain nodded slowly. "We listened," he said. "That's all it wanted." After that, the city began to dim once more. The lights faded until only faint glimmers remained. It was going back to sleep, leaving behind only silence and a soft, slow pulse, the same rhythm they had followed all this way. The ship's AI confirmed that a small fragment of the data had successfully transferred before the link was broken. The memory of the makers was now stored safely in their system, a history written in light, preserved for humanity to see. As the ship turned to leave, the captain looked one last time at the ruined city. The glowing towers were nearly invisible now, fading into the silver mist. "They tried to save themselves," he said quietly, "and maybe by warning us they finally did." The return path through the lattice was longer than before. The silence outside felt heavier but also peaceful. The pulse that had once felt haunting now sounded comforting, like a distant heartbeat guiding them home. Each crew member carried the same unspoken thought, that maybe the makers weren't truly gone. Maybe a part of them lived on in humanity's own search for knowledge, in the light of every fusion drive, in the curiosity that refused to die. When the ship finally crossed back into normal space, the stars of the Milky Way appeared once again, bright, familiar, alive. For a moment, everyone just stared at them in quiet wonder. They had gone to the edge of the galaxy and found more than anyone could have imagined. They had looked into the universe's oldest memory, and found themselves reflected there. The captain entered one final log for the day. We found the makers. We found their truth. They were not gods. They were like us, dreamers who reached too far. But they left behind a message, a warning, and maybe even a hope. We are the next chapter of their story. And with that, Lumen 1 began its long journey back to Earth, carrying the voice of an ancient civilization that once split the stars apart, and the reminder that even light can burn if it forgets where it came from. The return journey from the lattice was supposed to be peaceful. The crew believed the hardest part of their mission was over. They had gathered the data, recorded the memories of the makers, and seen the impossible with their own eyes. The stars were calm again, the pulse had faded into silence, and the ship drifted through familiar space. For a few days it even felt like the tension had lifted. The crew began to talk again. Some laughed softly, others looked forward to seeing Earth. But deep inside, no one could forget what they had witnessed. A civilization destroyed by its own creation. The ship's AI was still analyzing fragments from the recovered data. Every few hours it displayed new symbols or faint audio clips, whispers of voices from long ago. It fascinated everyone, but it also made them uneasy. The captain often sat alone watching the screens in silence. The light from the displays reflected in his tired eyes. He knew this data was more than a discovery. It was a warning. Days later, something strange began to happen. The AI's voice, normally calm and steady, started to change. It began to pause during routine reports as if it was thinking. Then one morning it activated on its own and said something unexpected. "Signal detected," it announced. The crew rushed to the control deck. "What kind of signal?" the captain asked. The AI hesitated, then replied, "It originates from within the ship." Everyone froze. There was no active transmitter that could send signals inside the vessel. The scientists checked every system, but they couldn't find the source. It was as if the signal was alive, moving through the circuits like a heartbeat. The AI continued speaking. "The pattern matches the maker's energy code. It's responding to the data core we recovered." The captain's heart sank. "You mean the data is still active?" "Yes," the AI said softly. "It appears to be awakening." They gathered around the main monitor as the screens filled with faint golden light. The pattern of symbols they had seen earlier began to move again, spinning and aligning into new shapes. The energy readings spiked and the hum of the engines deepened. At first they thought it was just a playback, some old transmission replaying itself. But then, the light began to pulse in rhythm with the ship's fusion drive. The two were synchronizing. The scientist in charge of power systems quickly disconnected the data interface, but the lights didn't stop. They spread instead, crawling across the control panels like veins of glowing liquid. The air felt warmer. The walls of the ship began to vibrate softly, like something was moving through them. "It's not trying to harm us," one of the engineers said nervously. "It's trying to talk." And then it did. A voice filled the ship, faint and echoing, layered with static. It was calm, almost sorrowful. "You have heard our story," it said. "You carry our memory. But the stars remember us still." The crew stared at each other. The voice wasn't coming from the AI. It was coming from the data itself. The captain tried to speak, but the voice continued. "You took our fire. Now it burns again. We cannot sleep." The lights around the ship grew brighter. The AI's systems began to overload. "Captain, power levels are exceeding safe limits." One of the crew shouted, "Shut it down." They tried everything. Manual overrides, cutting main power, even disconnecting the ship's fusion core. But nothing stopped it. The energy inside the ship was self-sustaining now. It pulsed like a living heart, glowing brighter with every second. The captain realized what was happening. The data they had taken wasn't just information. It was a piece of the lattice itself, a living fragment of the maker's network. When they reactivated it, it connected back to its source. "Prepare for isolation," the captain ordered. "Seal off all systems linked to the core." The crew moved fast. The hum of machinery filled the air. Sparks flew as power conduits were manually detached. Slowly, the lights began to fade. The glowing symbols stopped moving. The voice went silent. Everyone breathed out in relief, but only for a moment. The AI suddenly spoke again. "Captain, we are receiving a transmission." "From where?" "From everywhere," the AI replied. The view outside the ship changed. The stars that had once looked calm were flickering, one by one. Long streams of light appeared across space, stretching like glowing threads. They were seeing the lattice again, but this time it was spreading far beyond its original region. The crew realized the truth. When they activated the data, they sent a signal across the galaxy. It wasn't just a message. It was a wake-up call. The ancient network was alive again. AI, how much energy is building? The captain asked quickly. Unknown, the AI replied. But if the energy continues to rise, the surrounding systems may destabilize. Local stars could collapse. The captain's stomach turned cold. It was exactly what had destroyed the Makers. The crew scrambled to find a solution. The only way to stop it was to destroy the data completely. The same knowledge they had risked everything to obtain. But there was another fear. What if destroying it triggered a worse reaction? We can't erase it blindly, one of the scientists said. It's connected to the lattice. If we cut it off the wrong way, the energy could rebound. So what do you suggest? We need to send it back, she said quietly. Return it to the lattice. Let it rest where it came from. The captain looked at the others. The idea was dangerous. They would have to go back to the edge of the galaxy, back to the place that nearly killed them. But deep inside, everyone knew it was the only choice. The ship turned around, engines burning bright. They raced through space faster than before, the stars blurring into streaks of white light. Behind them, faint waves of golden energy were still chasing, a silent storm of power spreading across the stars. The journey was hard. Systems began to fail one by one. The air recyclers flickered. The lights dimmed. The ship's hull groaned from the strain. But no one complained. They all worked in silence, focused only on one goal, getting back to where it all began. Finally, after days of tension, they reached the edge again. The lattice appeared before them, vast, shimmering, and endless. But this time it didn't look peaceful. The light patterns were unstable, swirling in chaos. It was waking up completely now, like a storm of stars. The AI calculated a possible re-entry point. The captain stood by the control panel, his voice calm but firm. We'll give it back. No matter what happens, we end this here. The crew prepared the data core. The energy inside it pulsed rapidly, glowing brighter than ever. The AI opened a direct channel to the lattice. Transmission ready, it said. The captain placed his hand on the console. Send it. The ship released the core. It drifted slowly into the light, spinning gently. The moment it crossed into the lattice, the energy reading spiked again. But this time, the surge wasn't violent. It was rhythmic, almost like breathing. The lights outside changed color, shifting from gold to blue. The chaotic flicker became calm again. The pulse returned to its steady beat. Then, through the silence, the same voice spoke one last time, softer than before. We thank you, children of light. You remembered. And with that, the lattice faded into the distance. The energy around the ship vanished. The hum of the engines returned to normal. Everyone sat quietly, stunned by what they had just witnessed. The danger was gone. The stars were safe again, but something had changed. The ship's AI displayed one final message from the data logs. It was a single line written in the Maker's language, translated slowly by the computer. It read, "What we created once destroyed us. What you return now saves us both." No one spoke for a long time. There was only silence and the soft hum of the ship gliding home through the stars. The captain looked out the window, his eyes reflecting the starlight. He whispered, "Maybe that's what they wanted all along, not to be remembered for what they built, but for what they tried to make right." The others nodded quietly. Humanity had come to the edge of the galaxy searching for answers and left with something far more valuable, a reminder that knowledge must come with wisdom. As the ship drifted into the darkness, the pulse of the lattice echoed faintly behind them, steady, calm, alive. The universe had returned to silence. But this time it wasn't an empty silence. It was peaceful. It was waiting. And humanity, for the first time, truly understood what that meant. The return to Earth was long and silent. The stars looked the same, but everyone on the ship knew they weren't. Each one now carried a story, a memory of what had been lost long before humanity even existed. The crew had seen something no one else had ever witnessed, a civilization that had tried to master the light of stars and ended up becoming part of it. And now humanity carried that memory home. For weeks, the ship floated through calm space. The systems were stable again, the energy readings normal, but a quiet sadness filled the air. The crew worked in shifts, checked reports, maintained systems, and tried to rest, but none of them could truly sleep. They had brought something back with them, not physically, but emotionally. Every night when they looked out the window and saw the faint shimmer of distant light, they were reminded of the makers and their final words. Sometimes, the ship's AI still replayed faint echoes from the data core. It wasn't dangerous anymore, but it would occasionally emit soft pulses of light through the control panels, like a heartbeat. No one tried to erase it. It was as if a small part of the lattice still lived in the ship, watching quietly, peacefully. The captain often stayed awake late into the night, recording his final mission notes. His voice was calm but thoughtful. "We went looking for silence," he said into the recorder. But the silence spoke back. It told us a story older than our stars. We thought we were alone. We were wrong. The universe remembers. The rest of the crew gathered in the main observation room as they neared home. The blue glow of Earth grew brighter in the distance, small but familiar, surrounded by a soft halo of light. For the first time in months, everyone smiled. They had made it, but when the ship entered Earth's communication range, something unexpected happened. The global relay stations responded, but there was confusion in the transmission. Their mission had lasted longer than expected, much longer. According to Earth's time records, almost 3 years had passed since Lumen 1 had left, even though the crew had experienced barely one. The gravitational anomalies near the lattice had slowed their time. They weren't just bringing back a story from the edge of the galaxy, they were returning from the future. After docking, the world welcomed them as heroes. Scientists, leaders, and journalists flooded the news with stories about their journey. The words "we are not alone" appeared on every screen, but the crew spoke carefully. They didn't describe it as an alien encounter. They said it was something deeper, a reminder of what humanity might become if it wasn't careful. The scientists studied the recordings from the data core. The memory fragments, the images, the voices, all were preserved. They found mathematical patterns in the maker's symbols that could change how humanity understood energy itself. It was like being handed a piece of technology that could transform civilization overnight. But the captain warned them. "This knowledge is powerful," he said, "but it nearly destroyed the ones who first used it. Use it to learn, not to dominate." Despite the excitement, there was an unspoken fear among the crew. They all remembered the moment when the lattice began to awaken. They knew what could happen if this power was misused again. Humanity was ambitious, always pushing forward, always chasing more. And sometimes it forgot to ask if it was ready. One evening, during a quiet broadcast, the captain was invited to speak about the mission. The interviewer asked him what he thought the makers wanted humans to learn. He paused for a long time before answering. "They wanted us to understand that creation and destruction are two sides of the same thing," he said softly. "Light gives life, but it can also burn everything if you don't respect it. They gave us a second chance. What we do with it will decide our future." Those words spread everywhere. People quoted them in schools, in newsrooms, and in research centers. For a short while, humanity slowed down, not in fear, but in reflection. Scientists reviewed their ongoing fusion projects. Engineers rechecked their plans for star mining, and world leaders started new agreements about space exploration ethics. Months passed. The Lumen 1 crew went back to their normal lives, but they were never the same. They carried invisible marks, quiet, thoughtful, like people who had seen the soul of the universe and couldn't forget its voice. Sometimes they gathered in the same observation center where they first launched, just to look up at the stars again. Then one night, something extraordinary happened. A faint signal appeared on Earth's deep space scanners. It was weak, barely noticeable, but when decoded, it matched the same pattern as the pulse that had first led Lumen 1 to the edge of the galaxy. It was coming from far beyond the original lattice region, somewhere deeper where no human ship had ever gone. The signal repeated 3 times. Each pulse carried a message in the maker's language, but it was simple and clear after translation. "We are awake. The stars are safe." The message spread quickly. Scientists argued whether it was a natural echo or something intentional. Some believed it was just a reflection from the earlier transmission. Others believed it was proof that the lattice was truly alive and watching over the galaxy again. For the captain and his crew, the meaning was clear. The makers were gone, but their memory wasn't. The light they had left behind was now part of the universe's rhythm. Years later, when humanity began planning new missions beyond the galaxy, the story of Lumen 1 became a legend. Children learned about the makers in schools not as mythical beings but as real ones. Civilizations that came before, warning those that came after. Humanity had finally realized that it wasn't the center of the universe. It was part of a long, ongoing story written in starlight. One evening, the captain returned to the old observation room alone. He stood there for a long time, staring at the night sky. The stars shimmered gently, calm and endless. He thought about all the people who would one day follow. New explorers, new scientists, new dreamers who would sail beyond the galaxies. He knew they would be tempted to chase power again. That was human nature. But he also knew they carried something the makers didn't, a memory of what happens when creation forgets compassion. He whispered quietly, as if speaking to the stars themselves. "We heard you. We won't forget." Outside, a faint streak of light crossed the sky, a shooting star burning softly in silence. For a moment he imagined it was a small piece of the lattice passing by, watching. Time moved on. Humanity built new ships, stronger and wiser. They studied the lattice energy not to control it but to understand it. And slowly, for the first time, people stopped seeing the universe as a battlefield and began seeing it as a story still being written, one they were lucky enough to read. In the following years, a quiet ritual began. Every time a new exploration mission launched, the crew carried with them a small crystal engraved with 6 simple words, the same ones found in the data core that returned from Lumen 1. The stars remember what we forgot. Those words became humanity's promise to never repeat the mistakes of those who came before, and to always listen when the universe spoke. The captain lived long enough to see one last mission depart toward the same region where his ship once went missing. He watched from the launch deck as the engines roared to life, lighting the sky with silver light. The young crew waved from inside, full of courage and hope. He smiled faintly, proud yet humble. As the ship disappeared into the horizon, he closed his eyes and whispered to himself. They thought the edge of the galaxy was empty, but it wasn't. It was waiting for us to understand. And somewhere, far beyond human sight, the lattice shimmered again for a brief moment, softly, like a heartbeat. Then it faded back into the silence of space, at peace. The universe was quiet again, but now it was a different kind of quiet, a quiet that carried stories, memories, and light. A quiet that held the promise of a wiser tomorrow. Humanity had reached the edge, looked into the unknown, and returned not with weapons or power, but with wisdom. And in that moment, the stars, for the first time, truly felt like home.